Hey folks, it's Patriot Nurse. Thank you for joining me today in this segment. I want to just speak from the heart with you guys, and I want to discuss human nature and how you're not crazy if your head's spinning right now, looking at the world around you and looking at what seems to be a sea of people who are addicted to pathologically following rules at any cost. So what brings this video about, I had a phone call this morning from a dear friend. And she's a fierce sister in the Lord, an incredible woman, God-fearing woman. And we were talking, and we talked for a good hour. And in this conversation, she basically shared with me the feelings that she has, even as a devout and strong woman of God, of being out of place, of being the person who everybody looks at as crazy. And so as I was sharing with her today, I felt that probably other people needed to hear this as well. If you are looking around right now as a person who has not complied in various different avenues, whether you chose not to roll up your sleeve, whether you chose not to allow yourself to be coerced, bullied, threatened, peer pressured into rolling up your sleeve, regardless of what it is, that you did not and have not caved in your conscience, or even if you have and you're thinking about maybe I shouldn't have and I don't want to do that again, if you're looking around and you're seeing the reality that's being projected like a hologram that the mainstream media and that probably the majority of people around you would have you believe, part of you starts to question your own sanity and part of you starts to think, am I the problem? Short answer is no. When you consider, and I'm going to speak very frankly with you, not from a point of putting people down, but just to be real here in this statement, 90% of humanity are comprised of rule followers, the descendants of peasants and serfs, who in their genetic makeup are predispositioned to follow rules. That doesn't mean that a person is destined to be a rule follower, destined to be a slave, destined to be a serf, simply because the people who have gone before them complied or made choices or didn't rise up in the midst of tyrannical oppression. But the fact remains that the majority of people throughout human history have not been landed gentry, have not been monarchs. They have been peasants, serfs, rule followers. They have been the oppressed. They have been the people who elected or who were bested in a game of strength into compliance. We have an average IQ for a reason. And again, I'm not saying this from a place of, oh, I'm so much better than everybody else. These are facts. We have an average IQ because there are a large amount of people who are lower than 100 on that. And there are some people who are higher. But the vast majority of people with an average intelligence are here because people who came before them followed rules. People who came before them let other people do the thinking for them. The history of human nature is one of rule followers and of cannon fodder throughout history. This is the reason why the American experiment in a constitutional republic of men who govern themselves is so extraordinary throughout the totality of human existence. Hitherto, the republic, most men were bullied and were told what to do every waking moment of the day by a monarch or by someone who made choices for them. Now we look at times past and we look at people groups who were serially subjected to the will of others, and we call groups of people like this slaves. But hardly anybody would look around in today's day and age in a highly technified world and say that people are slaves walking around with their iPhones and walking around with debit cards and credit cards, constantly streaming information / edutainment, education, entertainment. Hardly anybody would view humanity as highly technified slaves. But the data is very clear. Historically, throughout history, the vast majority of people are slaves. What we have right now in this world is a greater degree of luxury and ease. But you have to ask yourself, are most people, A, willing, be capable of making their own decisions and standing firmly by their conscience? In this generation, we are answering that question. When I look around and I see that right out of the gate, 50% of people complied, 50% of people roughly did what they were told to do, that is not surprising to me. It shouldn't be surprising to you. If you are not in that group, or you are previously have been in that group and you feel bad about it and you don't want to do that anymore, and you don't want to comply with someone who is literally telling you they care so little about you that they're willing to violate their conscience, your conscience, to have their way with you, you shouldn't be surprised that most people follow, because most people at the end of the day do not have the courage or the faith to stand up in defiance of tyranny, to stand up in defiance of someone bullying them. Most people will cow to whatever is happening. The question is, will you do it? And are you screwed up for seeing that there's a problem with this? No, you're not screwed up. No, you're not crazy for seeing how is it that all these people who initially were like, oh, I don't want to do it, now are doing it. It is a question of faith. It is a question of personal integrity. And really, it's a question of what do you want? I expect fully 90% of people to completely bow down. It may be different here in the United States. The part of the country that I'm in, we have anywhere between 35 to 40% noncompliance. I have a hypothesis about this. My hypothesis is that the people who founded and stayed in this area that I'm in, these are the descendants of people who hated tyranny and who fought it tooth and nail and spilt a lot of blood to secure their freedom. And part of these things are in our DNA. But your DNA doesn't make your choices. You make your choices. We have been the inheritors of the luxury and the affluence that comes as a consequence from financial freedom, the prosperity that comes from freedom. But that freedom, the prosperity that was garnered by the freedom, that freedom wasn't secured in ease. That freedom was secured in blood. That freedom was secured through great expense of toil and suffering. Most people throughout history are unwilling to do this. This is the nature of epochs. Groups of people and their collective behaviors form history. And the groups of people whose collective behavior has formed history up until this point has been one of compliance and of servitude and of weakness and a willingness to say, you know what, I want to go to a hockey game, so I'm going to roll up my sleeve. I want to go to cultural event X, Y, and Z. Most human beings lack self-discipline. Most human beings lack strength and courage. This is why it's so rare when we hear stories about true heroes. That word has been so watered down. Exceptionalism of character is what creates the desire in us to look at someone whom we admire, to do better and to emulate them. When you look around and you see people falling into place, walking lockstep with whatever the Politburo tells them to do, it's coming from a place of subservience and it's coming from a place of fear. But if you're familiar with the Tytler cycle of history, throughout the cycle of righteous revolutions, there has to be a faith that undergirds the will to throw off tyranny. Most people are not willing to do that until they are so uncomfortable that living in the world proposed to them is more of a threat to their own personal outlook on life and of their value as a human being. Living in the world that tyranny would create for them is untenable. Until it gets to that point, people are going to continue to be slaves. So you're not crazy if you're looking around and thinking, man, there must be something wrong with me. Like, gee whiz, everybody else is complying. This is a facade. In one sense, most of humanity is weak. If you are the strong and if you're the person who's resolute and who's coming from a place of, I do not want my conscience violated because I don't feel good about something. I don't want to give to it because somebody else tells me to do it. I want to be convinced of something, and if I don't have peace about it, I'm not going to comply with it. If you're a person at a place in your life where you're looking around and seeing a sea of people complying, we shouldn't be surprised. That's what humans do. But if you're in the group that does not comply, it is your duty not to feel bad about it. It is your duty to have enough self-respect and enough value for the life that the Creator has put in you to not trade your dignity away simply for convenience, simply for approbation of your peers. It is your duty to respect yourself enough to stand on your principles. Now, we all have points in our life where we're going to be strong, when we're going to have weakness. This is the point of having people together in groups. One day may be good for me, whereas another day I may need encouragement from someone else. You're not going to be 100% all the time. That's why we have friends. That's why we have groups of people to encourage us. Iron sharpeneth iron, so one man sharpeneth another. He who walks with the wise grows wise, but the companion of fools suffers harm. You show me your 5 closest friends and I'll show you your character. In times like this, when you're looking around, it is so important to be surrounded by people who are like-minded and people who share your convictions and share your faith. And I know that this is a challenge for a lot of people because your own families are divided. You're looking at going into work where you're increasingly ostracized and marginalized and hated and looked down upon simply because you choose to exercise control over your own body. Ask yourself the question, who is further out of line here? Someone who simply wants to be left alone to maintain the right to choose their own best selections for healthcare? Or someone who bullies and marginalizes and peer pressures and ostracizes people who choose to hold to their sovereignty? Who's more screwed up? It's not you. Look around at the 90% of human history that have dutifully marched off into the waste bin of empires to be cannon fodder for stronger and more determined men. There is no moral superiority in capitulating for convenience. People lie to themselves lots of different ways. You're not crazy for holding firm. We are in a time, I think, when people more and more are starting to realize that this bubble that we've lived in of affluence and prosperity and tech, and oversaturation of pleasure, easily accessible pleasure, has not made us better men. It has made us weaker human beings. Sure, we've got stuff, but we don't have the conviction, the resolution, the koach, the inner strength of our ancestors in many cases. And why is that? I submit to you, because we have abandoned the root. Any plant, when uprooted from its foundation, is going to wither. Some may last longer than others due to their reserves. But if you cut off a plant from its roots, it's going to wither away, particularly when you put it under a little bit of heat. We have to determine, are we going to stick to the roots? If you're trying to do this, friends, yourself, if you're trying to stand in your own strength, that's not sustainable and it's probably not going to work. If, however, you are standing firmly from a fixed position, fortified by prayer, particularly fasted prayer, and a knowledge of who your God is and whom you serve, you realize freedom, sovereignty of the individual, and kingship over one's own life and territory only comes through servanthood and obedience to the Lord God Almighty. Everyone is going to serve something in this world, or someone. The dustbin of history, the followers of history, are men who choose to serve men. The kings and the people who triumph in history are the men who choose to serve God. I know He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. I know that He who began a good work is faithful to complete it. I don't need the approval of man. It's nice to have it. At the end of our life, we have to ask ourselves this question. What do we want to look back on? What do we want to hear? Do I want to look back upon my life and see that I caved so I could go to a hockey game? I caved so that I could have some illusion of choice. Or did I stand firm because it was my principles and my allegiance to God that guided me and grounded me in hard times. We look oftentimes at history and at people who made history as, wow, they were so strong. How could people around them be so dumb and be so easily cowed? That is the nature of history, the 90% of people who lack faith and courage. Human beings are notoriously predictable. We have been the inheritors of a great legacy. The question is, are we going to keep it and are we going to push it forward? You're not crazy. The rest of the world's nuts. You who have conviction and courage, people standing upon their principles, the problem is not with you. The problem is with everybody else who has no principles. When people have no principles, they will do anything that they're told to do. Anything. I heard this said once by Rebbitzin Sephora Heller, who is a teacher and a giant intellect. And she made this comparison. She said, asked the question. She said, how did the Nazi warden at Auschwitz, standing at the fork in the road between who lives and who dies, how did he get there? Did he wake up one morning at 7 years old and think, gee whiz, when I get to be 25, I want to be the person standing between who lives and who dies. I'm going to make the choice to destroy families and to obliterate and wipe out human beings wholesale en masse for a party platform. What 7-year-old is going to make that decision? No. The answer is that the big decisions in life are made by the accumulation of the small ones. Your character is formed. Our character is formed through our collective sequential choices in life. We're all going to mess up. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to do things that we look back on later and think, gee whiz, I wish I would have done that differently. You have the choice to do things differently. It involves recognizing that you screwed up. It involves recognizing that we at times are not going to be consistent in our application of our faith and understanding. That's okay. You're a human being. The question is, what's your pattern going to be? Are you going to elect to make solid choices? Are you going to elect to stand firmly on your faith and firmly on your principles? The rest of the world screwed up. The rest of the world, when they look back at the horrors of genocidal regimes, they look at people like the Auschwitz Guard and they see an other. They don't see themselves. The vast majority of humanity, quite easily, under just the right pressures, will turn into Auschwitz Guards. Very few people will have enough self-awareness and discipline to make solid choices in the moments consistently over their lifetime. This is why we look back on people's legacy in their eulogies when they pass, and we look at how they've lived their life. What do you want people? Morbid thought, but a good one to ponder. What do you want people to say about you after you're gone? May it be till we're all 120. What do you want people to say about you? What type of legacy do you want to have? You don't have a good legacy by being a rule follower and letting other people make decisions for you that violate your conscience. You're not crazy. The rest of the world's mental. I hope that was helpful for y'all today. If you did enjoy the video, I hope you'll subscribe to me here on YouTube, Patriot Nurse. You can also support me on Patreon, Subscribestar, Cryptocurrency, and PayPal. I'll have links below. Friends, it is very important that as these days are moving forward, you, as best as possible, self-select out of their grid, out of their control, which means discipline on your part to educate yourself in your areas of deficiency. I recommend that you cover the beans, bullets, and Band-Aids, that you have food stored up, that you have a way to defend yourself. But friends, you need to be able to take care of your family's medical and healthcare needs at home as best as possible. And I've made two options if you want to train with me. You can train with me online. You can take my online course. I got a link below. It's 4 hours. It's $129. If you want to train with me in person in a longer format, I have live training events. I'm going to be teaching Salt Lake next month, and then Texas, Keller, Texas in December, and then also Knoxville, Tennessee in January. All of these are the 4-day classes where you do the Medical Prep 101, 201, and then the 301, which is Nutrition, Herbs, and Old School Disease. I've tried to make this as easy as possible for people to access training, friends. But you need to prioritize this in your life. Part of your ability to stand flint-faced in the midst of opposition is knowing that you can meet your needs practically and tangibly, but also having your faith that the Lord God Almighty is going to show up for you in the furnace with your faith. He will. What kind of God do we serve? That's really the question. Hope it was helpful for y'all. For now, it's Patriot Nurse signing off, and I'll see y'all later. Bye.